My name is Larry Smith. I was a Baltimore City police officer from 1999 until 2017, and now I'm a freelance writer.
So talk about where we are right now and just why this has been a flashpoint in recent weeks and almost like an annual thing that the Inner Harbor becomes a flashpoint between Baltimore youth and the Baltimore Police Department.
Yeah, so we're down in the harbor, and I mean it's a nice, beautiful day out. You- Obviously, you can see the police car behind me, just chilling out. So, but every year around this time is when the police department starts their extra patrols down here, and it's always geared towards keeping teenagers either out of the harbor or even coming to the harbor. And usually, what happens is around this time of year, summer vacation starts for kids. There's not a lot to do in the city, so the harbor is one of the few places they can come and hang out and have fun. And the Baltimore Police Department has historically viewed them as a potential problem. Like they always view it as a potential threat that something bad could happen when groups of kids come down here.
And so we saw on over Memorial Day weekend, we saw reports of hundreds of youths fighting. That's what BAL Radio posted online. Turns out what actually happened was a little different. And in response, city leaders have said for the most part that it was a small group of kids, not everyone that was down here was responsible for it. But they've also said, it's a parenting issue, and that's what the city needs to focus on. How do you respond to that?
Well, I mean, first of all, if you have 400 or 500 people of any age group, there's the potential for some sort of problem, especially down here. I mean, you have the stadiums right over here. So we used to have football games and baseball games let out. There's always been fights, disorderly conduct from sports fans down here, but it doesn't. The police don't respond the same way to that. For some reason, kids are viewed as this extra threat. So just by the mere presence of teenagers will elicit some sort of response from the police department. And so you need to ask yourself, what are the kids reacting to? Are the kids reacting to the police? Because the police could be causing the problem. I mean, we saw that in 2015 in Montgomery Mall. The police created that situation there. So when you send the police down here and you sort of, cut off access to certain parts of downtown in the Inner Harbor, and kids feel trapped by the police, they're going to react to that.
And from your experience as an officer, what impact does that have on young people themselves, essentially being made to feel they aren't welcome in a public space which has been subsidized by tax dollars?
So the language that city politicians and the FOP have been using is very polarizing, and kids live here in this city. There's very little opportunity for them. There's very little for them to do, especially during summer with rec centers closed. Some of the parks are in disrepair, so that there's not a lot of outlet for them. When you specifically say that you're putting police at the Inner Harbor because of teenagers, they're already going to feel, they already feel marginalized. So you're just making it worse. So that's why I said, like, the potential for them to react to the police is even greater. Jack Young said it was a parenting issue, but the thing is, it's not that easy because you don't know what a specific child's home life is like. Maybe a parent works 2 or 3 jobs. Maybe a parent is struggling with some sort of addiction or health issues. So you can't just put the onus on the parent. I mean, there's plenty of adults, there's plenty of police who do things wrong. Where are their parents? So, the city is obligated to care for these children too. They're residents here. Jack Young said this is for everyone, but you're not making it a welcoming area for everyone.
The Fraternal Order of Police tweeted out, "To our officers at the harbor tonight, protect each other and don't fall into the trap that they are only kids. Some are criminals."
Yeah, and again, that's more of the polarizing language I was talking about. So the FOP union is already sort of putting a target on these kids. So any interaction that they have, a cop's mindset is, well, they could be a criminal. So it's already going to start off as a negative interaction. And a lot of this language is just being substituted for language like back in the 80s and 90s. Like if you look at the Central Park 5 case in New York, like the big terminology back then was wilding. Teenagers were wilding. Now in Baltimore, you have mainstream media, politicians, and the FOP using terms like flooding the harbor, creating chaos, mayhem, things like that. So it's like this. It's like this language, and they create this sort of boogeyman for tourists or county residents who now are afraid to come down here, and it just feeds this negative image that the kids are going to be up to no good.
And what do you think? What do you think needs to happen? What would an actual positive public policy look like to make the space welcoming, make it safe for everybody, and to help address some of these problems that we're seeing around the city?
Well, not just in the harbor, but in the city as a whole. I mean, the first thing is you got to take money away from the police department. The police department gets $500 million. It's ridiculous. What are they doing with it? So you need to start taking some money away from them. You need to open rec centers back up, and you need to create things for youth. If it's sporting events at night, keep the rec centers open later. Do something like have free movies, like movies in the park. I mean, you could have free movies down here and have kids come down and watch them. You need to just create more things for kids to do, and a huge part of that is money. And the police department gets a ridiculous amount of money from the city.
Yeah, we spend the most per capita at any major city, while we're seeing our schools are grossly underfunded. You talked about rec centers, healthcare services, mental health services are being cut at the expense of more law enforcement.
Right, and another thing is, like when I started in 1999 and into the early 2000s, there were police athletic leagues, which were basically rec centers that the police operated. But even with their budget, they didn't keep them open. They eventually closed them all and sent the officers who staffed the PAL centers back into patrol. So even with the police budget, it's like they can't even come up with a solution other than let's just put 50 cops down at the harbor, and form skirmish lines and prevent kids from entering. Like, that's not the answer. I mean, I don't know that even adults would feel welcome when they see that. I don't know if it makes adults feel safer or not to see. If I went somewhere and saw 50 cops, I'd be like, well, something's not right. Maybe I'm not going to go here. Whereas if I saw a bunch of kids having fun, all right, it's a nice summer day.
And you alluded to the Baltimore uprising. That was more than 4 years ago now. Do you think the city has learned the right lessons from that, and is it moving forward?
I actually kind of hoped that maybe they had, but the response on Memorial Day made it abundantly clear that the police have learned absolutely nothing since April 27th, 2015. Like, I mean, absolutely nothing. They created that scenario. They created that response was a direct result of police action, and Memorial Day weekend was almost a carbon copy of that. I mean, it could have gone south so fast. Luckily, it didn't. But no, I don't think the police have learned a single lesson and how to treat and deal with children.
And can you talk a little bit about your own personal journey? They say it's the blue line, the blue code, where a lot of officers won't be critical of other officers no matter what happens. You have sort of taken a different path. Talk about how you got there, if you can.
Well, I mean, I had sort of become disillusioned with the police department in general. The war on drugs, a lot of the zero tolerance stuff that I went through under Martin O'Malley, arresting people for very petty crimes. I mean, we were arresting people really for no reason, just simply to arrest them. And, at some point, even kids become a part of that because of the curfew law. So even kids are a stat that was police were eager to get. So I had really become disillusioned with the way things were going anyway. But then when I went to internal affairs in 2013, and I saw exactly just how broken the system that is supposed to prevent bad cops from remaining on the job was completely broken, was completely toothless. Cops were allowed to get away with almost everything. I mean, you saw that with the gun trace task force. Those guys operated not just in that unit, but in other units for well over a decade And you're telling me no one caught on to it? I mean, it was a system that is designed to allow bad cops to exist and continue to exist as long as they are providing a service to command. And the service the gun trace task force was providing was bringing in a large number of high profile arrests, a lot of gun seizures and stuff like that. So they would turn a blind eye to anything else that may have been going on.
So Detective Jamel Raymond just got 12 years a week ago. Do you think that episode is behind us, or do you think there's more that still is going to be uncovered?
Oh no, I think there's definitely more that's going to be uncovered. I mean, Officer Ram was accused of stealing $10,000 years before that he was in the GTTF. He was actually, Internal Affairs actually sustained a case on him, but he wasn't terminated, so he was allowed to remain on the job, and his behavior got even bolder. So. No, there's no way it's just limited to those guys. I mean, they worked with other cops and other units that are still in existence, and officers who are still working here. And I mean, you see that now. I mean, with Sergeant Gladstone, who just pled guilty to planting the gun. I mean, obviously, there are so many other stories out there, and we're only getting little snippets of each one each time a cop is indicted.
And finally, do you feel that? Do you feel you're taking a risk at all by speaking out against the police department? We've seen what's happened to Joe Crystal and other former officers that have been harassed and targeted for being critical of how it operates.
Well, I mean, Joe Crystal was brave because he talked about it while he was still employed. He saw something that he thought was wrong, and he spoke up. And he paid dearly for that. I didn't have the courage to speak up while I was employed. I'm doing it now that I'm not employed there. So no, I don't feel like I'm taking a risk. I mean, what are they gonna do, troll me on social media? I don't care. I'm not afraid of that.
And where can we find your work and the stuff you're doing now?
I write for The Appeal and also on Medium. That's mainly where I write.
We'll link to your latest stuff. Thanks so much for joining us.
All right, thank you for having me.